The night my son's fiancée laughed as 30-year-old wine bled across my cellar floor, I understood something devastatingly clear. Some people inherit names, some inherit money, but very few understand what legacy actually costs. I built the vineyard long before my son learned how to ride a bicycle. I remember the first year vividly, the way my hands cracked from pruning in winter, the way the soil stained my clothes a permanent rust red, the way neighbors shook their heads and told me wine was a foolish dream for a woman alone. Every vine was planted with intention, every barrel earned through patience. This place was never an inheritance. It was a conquest. And that distinction would matter more than I ever imagined. The engagement party was supposed to be a simple celebration. Lanterns hung low between the rows of oak barrels, casting warm light across stone floors polished by decades of careful footsteps. The air smelled of cork, wood, and fermenting grapes, comforting, familiar, sacred. I had hosted harvest feasts here, quiet investor tastings, even memorials. But that evening felt different. Louder. Faster. Less reverent. And at the center of it all was Madison. Madison moved through the vineyard as if it were already hers. She laughed loudly, touching everything without asking, pulling friends toward shelves and racks usually reserved for guided tastings. Confidence radiated from her, the kind that often masks a lack of curiosity. She didn't look at labels. She didn't ask questions. She assumed. Derek followed her closely, smiling too easily, correcting nothing. My son had always been conflict-averse. Even as a boy, he would rather accept discomfort than cause it for someone else. I noticed the bottle before I heard it break. A 1989 reserve, stored deliberately in the far cellar, behind an iron gate meant more as a signal than a barrier. Madison had already twisted the cork free when I saw her, holding the bottle like a prop. She laughed and said something about how many bottles there were, how excessive it all seemed. I opened my mouth to speak, but before a word escaped, the bottle slipped from her hand. It didn't shatter dramatically, just enough to explode against the stone floor, sending wine like dark blood across shoes and linen. The room fell silent. For one suspended moment, everyone froze. Then Madison laughed. "Oops," she said lightly. "Guess that one's gone." She reached for another, and chaos followed. A second bottle cracked. Then a third as someone stepped back too quickly. Glass scattered, wine soaked into wood that had absorbed history for generations. I stood perfectly still, listening to the sound of something irreplaceable bleeding into the floor. "Do you have any idea what you just broke?" I asked, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. Madison waved a dismissive hand. "Relax. We'll just open another. It's not like these are priceless." That was when I looked at Derek. Not for help, but for understanding. His expression wasn't guilt. It was confusion. And in that instant, the truth settled heavily in my chest. They didn't know. They didn't know what the bottles were worth. They didn't know who owned the vineyard. And worse, they didn't realize how dangerous assumptions could be when paired with entitlement. As the night went on, the misunderstanding deepened. Madison joked openly about selling wine for their honeymoon, about future inheritance and family assets. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Derek laughed weakly, offering small tonal corrections but never challenging the substance. When I finally spoke again, the words landed like a blade slicing through silk. "I own this vineyard," I said. Madison blinked, confused. "Well, of course. I mean, family-owned, right?" "No," I replied evenly. "I own it. Alone. Derek has no stake in it. Not promised. Not implied." The room shifted. Madison's smile tightened, brittle now. "But Derek said." I turned to my son. "What exactly did you say?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. She assumed, he said quietly. I didn't correct her. That moment hurt more than the broken bottles. Not because of money, but because silence had become a form of betrayal. The bottles Madison destroyed were worth tens of thousands of dollars. Some were irreplaceable, captured moments of weather, soil, and timing that would never exist again. As numbers surfaced, color drained from Madison's face. The laughter vanished. This is insane, she whispered. Why would you even keep something like that out? Because respect doesn't require locks, I answered. Only understanding. The guests grew quiet, their celebration collapsing under the weight of reality. Apologies came later, thin, defensive, centered on intention rather than accountability. Derek said very little. He never had when consequences arrived. The weeks that followed were colder than winter. Insurance softened the loss but didn't erase it. Wine can be replaced on paper, but legacy cannot. We sat together one afternoon, no celebration, no guests, no distractions. You don't inherit what you don't respect, I told them. And you don't earn trust by assuming it. Madison cried then, real tears this time. Not for the wine, but for the life she thought she was marrying into. Derek admitted what I already knew, he had allowed the misconception because it made him feel secure. Letting her believe cost him honesty, and eventually, credibility. 6 months later, things were different. They had taken financial responsibility for part of the loss. Madison enrolled in courses on wine stewardship. Derek stopped avoiding hard conversations. Progress was slow, imperfect, but real. 2 years later, when they planned their wedding, it was modest. Grounded. Earned. Madison asked permission before touching anything. Derek spoke with clarity. And for the first time, I saw something worth protecting, not entitlement, but growth. The wine they destroyed was irreplaceable. But the people they became by facing the consequences were far more valuable. If this story moved you, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe to Wisdom to Revenge for more powerful narrations.